This is Dan Stoloff, and you're listening to Monday Morning Critic.
So, Dan, I'm talking to a fellow Massachusetts native. Is this the case?
Yes, absolutely. Newton, Mass.
How many years in Newton, Dan?
Let me see. I was there till college, so 18.
Wow.
And then I left. I left Massachusetts. Went to school at Ithaca, New York. Then went back to Boston, where I began my career from '84 to about '90. I was in Boston.
Yeah. What kind of kid were you, Dan? As far as because I just saw The Fabelmans with Spielberg, and every time I have a cinematographer on,
That was me. I mean, I was going to say that was me. Steven stole my story. That's exactly. And even from the age group, I think I was, you know what? Actually, the beginning was a little bit different because for me, I didn't like school, first of all. And when a 16 millimeter projector was rolled into the classroom, my heart started beating faster. And I didn't care what it was they were going to show us, but I would just get lost in the movie. The smell, the clicking of the projector, the lights going down. It was magical. I was probably 11 years old when I was watching a movie, and I think I noticed for the first time the credit, director of photography. And though I didn't really knew what that meant, I said, "That's me. That's what I want to do." I knew I wanted to make movies, and I knew I loved the camera. I always thought that directors were people who were coming more from content and from literature and that sort of thing. And so I just focused myself on my strength, which was the camera.
Yeah. So you did have a chance to see The Fabelmans then, obviously.
I did see The Fabelmans, and hang on one second. I got to let Jasper out of the room.
Okay.
Okay, Jasper. There you go. I did see The Fabelmans, and I loved it. It really captured the magic of the seduction of cinema and how a kid can get pulled into that and sort of control a situation in a world where he had no control over anything. My parents were divorced and going through all that, and there was all this insanity swirling around me too. And the idea that I could control what's in the frame to the extent, just like with Steven and throwing the dust and all that stuff. I mean, that was totally me. And I don't know, I made dozens of films as a child up until junior high when they taught a class. I took the class, and I mean, the rest I just followed that like a laser beam. I followed that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I got to tell you, I wasn't ready for how personal that movie was. I was expecting the film part of it. I get it, his love, but I wasn't expecting how you said it great. Things that are out of your control and living your life and living a dream. So, not to get caught up in The Fabelmans, but the last thing I'll say is I loved how he improvised on the poking holes in the film for the flash out of the gun. Right. I just thought that was so cool.
So cool. So great. I mean, and filmically, the way that he told that story, where he held it until the car ride with his dad, that's great, Spielberg. That's classic. It leaves you wondering, how did he do that? And we're watching, and it looked like he just spliced in white frames, but it was a little cooler than that. And I don't know. I'd be interesting to find out if that's what they actually did for the film that we saw, or if it was something that was a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah, and I just, like, every guest I have that's a great cinematographer like you or a great director, I always think of, they went through this. They experienced, like, they had to. Like, if you don't have this passion or love, there's no way you are where you are today. There's just it just doesn't happen that way, right?
No, it's too consuming. It's too demanding of a career choice. You give up quite a lot. You work ridiculous hours, and you have to really, really love it. Especially at the beginning of your career, you're working for little, if any, money, and you're saying to yourself, and your parents are saying to you, "What are you doing? You're not making any money. This is crazy. You need to get a real job." And I went through a lot of the same stuff that Sammy Fabelman's dad was. That was my dad in a lot of ways. Just not understanding. They're from a different world and a different time, not understanding that this is a real thing and that this is a career thing. And again, not to get too caught up on the Fabelmans, but the one thing that really hit me hard was when his dad said, you've got to make something that people can use. His dad had no idea how people need this.
Oh my
And
God.
I
Yeah.
think that what we do, and you know, living through a pandemic and everything else, I think what we do is we not create something that people can use, but something that people need.
Yeah, that's well said. That is so well said. So I could picture you. So, when you leave for Ithaca, are you homesick at all, Dan? You find yourself like
No,
you
no,
wish.
no. I had a blast. I think it's a great school. I found another family right away, and people my own age, and fellow filmmakers who shared the passion that I shared. And the cinema school at that time, I'm not sure how it is now, but in the cinema major, there were only, I think, 14 students. So it was very competitive to get into it. So all the kids there were very much like me. I mean, they had all made films, and were committed to following through and making a career out of this.
Yeah, that's pretty. Do you remember when outside of Ithaca? Do you remember when you kind of realized, this is a huge chance. I've got to take it. It's the biggest leap of faith I can take. Is there that moment for you, the leap of faith moment, or is it a bunch of moments like that, Dan?
I think it's a bunch of moments. I mean, for me, I think that moment on maybe a slightly lesser scale, because I already was committed, was I had worked when I graduated college. I had worked at a small production company, a boutique production company, where I got a lot of experience working on industrials and Ginsu knife commercials, and you name it. We did stuff. We would go out and operate teleprompter. We would do a little of everything. And then there was a certain point, I think I was probably 24, a couple of years after working there, I decided I was going to quit that and just go freelance. And that's where I kind of caught hell from my father. It was like, you've got a paying job. What are you doing? No, 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 I think I can do this. And that was a bit of a scary moment, but
Yeah.
it didn't take long until I had quadrupled my salary and started a career of my own as a cinematographer.
Yeah, that's awesome. To have that drive to go through on that is pretty impressive to say the least. As is your filmography. I have to say, for those listening, we're talking about The Patient, The Boys, Amazing Stories, Suits, Miracle, Americans Gate. I have to tell you one. I've been dying to tell this all day. I was in love with the movie 20 years ago. I still am. I love it. Underrated. I loved Game Day.
Oh,
This
how funny.
this movie ends with Three Dog Night, and I remember watching this movie for the first time, like pumping my fist, like this was awesome. Like
Oh,
I
I'm
don't know,
sorry.
yeah, I will be
You're
the
the only one.
yeah. I Richard Lewis is so good in that movie.
I think so too. I was really proud of that movie, and a little more than a little heartbroken that it didn't bust through the way that I thought that it should. And that's the business, though. There are so many unpolished gems out there that we will never see, and that's one of them. But the thing about that movie that's critical for me is that that's what got me Miracle, which you may or may not know, it was my first studio film. And that
yeah,
was a huge leap of faith for Disney to hire me, to come on board after having done a bunch of ragtag independent films, to give me a shot at that. And I credit Gavin O'Connor for going to bat for me and really fighting hard. We had done Tumbleweeds together,
yeah,
so we had that track record. But yeah, that's the thing. That's how I look in retrospect at my experience of Game Day, was that, oh, that's why I had to do that. That's
yeah,
why that had to be really good. And one thing about that movie that I'm particularly proud of is the action footage, which we did the same thing in that we did in Miracle. We broke every play down, storyboarded every play, figured out exactly where the camera should be at every single moment. Nothing was left to chance. It wasn't like set up 4 cameras and just start playing. Those were shots. Those
yeah.
were very specific shots.
Yeah, it's really good. For those listening, it's like $3 or $2 on Prime. It's so worth every penny. I
Oh,
mean,
that's great. I did not know that.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's great. Great.
But I heard you mention Roger Deakins on a few occasions. What makes him so special, Danny? I mean, I guess it's like asking what makes Spielberg special. But in your eyes, like what makes Roger Deakins special?
Well, Roger Deakins for me is sort of the voice in my ear that I hear, although I've never met Roger. It's the voice that I hear and say, what would Roger do here? And from all the stuff that I've read, interviews, et cetera, the way that Roger approaches a project is from the inside out, that first of all, the story is the most important thing. That everything that you do has to contribute to the narrative drive. That's the master. The narrative drive is the purpose.
Right.
Getting a little bit more technical into it, to walk into a room and say, oh wow, the light in this room is magnificent, let's film here. That's great. And you need to be able to recognize that in my field. But the trick is maintaining that light for 12 hours and losing the light and still maintaining it and figuring out, to me, the really interesting, challenging thing is, because nothing is ideal, right? I mean, the late afternoon light could be beautiful, and you tell the assistant director, I have to be here late afternoon. You get there at 7 o'clock, the sun has just set. It's like, oh, wow, that would have been great. What am I going to do to recreate that thing that I saw?
Yeah.
So I think that is, to get back to your question, what makes Roger special. Every one of his movies looks different, but to me, tone perfect. You know, he's like a musician who never misses a note. And so he can do comedy, he can do The Big Lebowski, he can do dark drama, he can do basically anything. So that's it. That's why. And I think that we are, by nature of our profession as cinematographers, we must be chameleons, and we need to be able to morph ourselves into those different genres. You know, like you mentioned before, I did The Patient. Could not be more different from The Boys.
Right.
Could not be more different
No.
from The American.
No.
And so the beauty of it is that every project, you're starting over and you're reinventing yourself to fit into that project.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Dan, since I've started the podcast 6 or 7 years ago, I mean, I've always been a heavy movie buff, a cinephile, but I've learned to appreciate cinematographers even more. I learned to appreciate composers even more. Like, I feel like they're the backbone in a lot of ways and they're underappreciated, in my opinion. Like, I mean, maybe there's people, but I feel like, you know, when somebody comes out of a movie, I mean, I was watching Top Gun Maverick, and I'm rewatching it just with Claudio Miranda's amazing cinematography in my mind. Like, same thing with Miracle. I mean, we're going to get to that in a moment because there's a couple of scenes that are my all-time favorites, but it's some of these scenes are so majestic and beautiful and stunning. It's like going to a museum for me and looking at paintings and just being awestruck.
Well, if let me throw a shout out to Nathan Barr, who was the composer on The Patient. I think that score is one of the best scores I have heard ever. I think it's magnificent. It's so subtle, and it so crawls under your skin. And it's not the kind of thing that most people are even aware of. You know, I was telling my wife, listen to the score. You know, when you watch this, really pay attention to the score. She's not in the film industry. She's a therapist. She's got nothing to do with our field. But she was like, oh my God, yeah. I never would have heard that. But it affects you. You know, it affects you. But on the other hand, you know, Mark Isham and his orchestration and the power of that really moves you.
Yeah. I want to talk about another one of your hidden gems I loved, and I'm so sad there was never a season 2, is Amazing Stories, The Cellar. And you also did The Rift, which was great too. But The Cellar was so good. It was so beautifully shot. You know, you're kind of balancing time a little bit. Like, I remember watching that when it first premiered. I was in love with that show.
Oh, good. We had a really good time doing it, and unfortunately, we were supposed to do 10 episodes. We didn't. We were having a hard time getting script approval between. At the time, you know, Apple was fledgling; it was brand new, and I think they were struggling with a lot of content issues. So we only made 7 out of the 10. And no, there's sadly no season 2, but what a great project. They're little movies, you know, they were little movies. We treated them as such. And, you know, they were generously enough budgeted that we could pull off the stuff that was on the page. That was a blast. And of course, working with Steven Spielberg, although I only met him through several conference calls, still I get tingles thinking about hearing Steven's voice on the other end of the line and his approval. That meant so much to me, that his notes back, that was, you know, that to me was one of the most satisfying career moments I've ever had.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. So let's touch on The Boys a little bit. Maybe one of the best episodes in The Boys history, Hero Gasm. You've
Yeah.
shot a bunch of shows, and I know from the interviews you've done, people are in awe of your cinematography on the show. Anthony Starr's pretty. I mean, there's a lot of special actors. He's pretty special, huh,
Oh,
Daniel?
Anthony is an incredible human being. I just think about in my imagination and my fantasy, I see them playing that sequence where he's in the mirror at the Emmys when he wins. That because I think that is some of the best acting that I have ever seen,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
live or on film. I mean, just two deranged characters played by one person going at each other, explaining so much backstory of how he got to be this way. He's a marvel. He really is, and a wonderful guy.
and I'm not just saying this to be kind to you. Like it's one of the, and The Boys is a highly rated show. This episode in particular is one of the more high. I mean, it's like 9.6 or something. It's like ridiculously through the roof.
Mhm.
And it's just if somebody asks what The Boys is about, it's this episode summarizes it. I mean, it's so batshit nutty.
Mhm.
I mean, only this episode could have the love sausage and have it be a beautiful. Like there's so much in it. Like you can't explain it, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It was, yeah. I think it's an amazing piece of writing, and it was a remarkably wonderful, fun challenge to figure all that stuff out. I mean, the things that I'm most proud of in that episode, I think, are the fight, which I'm not a big fan of cinema fights. I find that
Yeah,
they're all the same. Like you've seen them all. I mean,
yeah.
what more can you do that's really different? That fight, though, was so character driven. It was so specific, and just the way it all came together, the set that we built and the way it was lit because of the way the set was built, the movement of the camera, just the specificity of it all. I feel like that was sort of for me my action apex right there.
Yeah, and to top that, the action, the A Train Blue Hawk scene is like,
Well, and of course
oof.
yeah, that'll take your breath, and that people find really disturbing for some reason. But, yeah, that was, but for me, that was for me, it was a much simpler task
Yeah,
because there were, a few beats in it and they weren't really hard to execute. The fight, on the other hand, was a little bit, was a lot more involved and a lot more planned and sweated over.
yeah. And when you have so like you've done many episodes, when you have a show that has multiple cinematographers, do their visions have to be the same? Because there are cinematographers. Like I know when I'm watching, say, like a Michael Mann movie, I know when I'm watching a different cinematographer. Like it doesn't like they have their own unique style. Do
Mhm.
the styles have to be similar, Dan, to make the show work? Like you can't have somebody that's drastically different from you
Yeah.
in style and lighting and shoot it. Like who how does that work when you have multiple unlike a movie which mostly just has one, I think.
Right. No, you're right. You're right. And it is tricky. It is tricky. And if there were another way, of course I would prefer that, but there
Yeah.
isn't. There's too much to do. And The Boys, we were shooting like 30-day episodes with 30 days of prep, which is like a movie, each episode was like a movie.
Jesus.
So there's no way you could do more than one. But yeah, you're right. The cinematographers have to be in sync. And I think we talk a lot. Um, I was on that particular season, on last season, I was the returning cinematographer. I sort of set the tone for the first episode. And it was carried through, I thought, very effectively. I thought he did a great job. Yeah, we have our rules, and basically they are set up by Eric Kripke, who was the showrunner.
Right.
And Eric's rule was always, it's got to be natural. I need to believe it. So everything you do has to be grounded in reality, in some kind of reality, so that it feels real. There's no fantasy here. The idea here is that superheroes exist in your world, and there could be one right outside your window right now. So like overblown lighting or too pretty or too slick is going to detract from what Eric wants. So he sort of sets the tone. Then we decide what equipment is going to be used, what lenses are going to be used, the what's handheld versus crane versus Dolly, whatever that is. It has a style. That show has a specific style. We're always kind of moving around that world. And so, yeah, so everybody has to be on board with
Yeah,
that
for
idea.
sure, for sure. And what I love about The Boys is this is exactly what the world would be like, Dan, if we had superheroes. They would be this terrible, this
Mhm.
awful. Like they would all be like Homelander. They would all be like these terrible people, and
Mhm.
they're not all terrible, but with people with that much power are godlike in it. That brings a whole different array of problems that you're seeing in The Boys.
It does, and really what the show is saying is it's not about superheroes. It's really about celebrity politicians. It's about
Yeah,
cult of personality, and I think that's what makes the show so powerful is that it's it's a metaphor
yeah,
for
yeah, for sure.
what's really going on. Sometimes the metaphor is more subtle. Sometimes it's right. It's right on the head.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, earlier you mentioned Gavin O'Connor, wonderful storyteller, director of Miracle. You said he went to bat for you. The studios were unsure of having, and I think you said this in another interview. They were unsure of you. How did Gavin convince them? Like, hey, listen, this guy's talented. He knows what he's doing. How did that process unfold? You started to talk about it. I probably cut you off because I'm rude
yeah,
sometimes.
no,
But
no worries. That's a great question, and I wasn't in the room, so I couldn't answer that.
yeah,
I know that he was consistent, and that he was committed, and that I know that I met every single executive at Disney over the period of 2 or 3 weeks before they hired me. I've never had so many meetings, and yeah, I guess it was a combination of Gavin's commitment. The reason that they hired Gavin was because they like Tumbleweed so much. The reason that Gavin said the reason you like that movie so much was the synergy between me and Dan, and that's what's on the screen, and that's what you're responding to.
yeah,
So that's what you can get if you bring him on board. I'm imagining this, by
yes.
the way. I don't know because, like I said, I wasn't in the room.
Right, right, right. No, but that says a lot, I think, about your ability and how Gavin perceives you as a professional.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you have to go. You have to be the one in the room that
Right.
gets their confidence, and that's the most important part of our job. Because if we didn't get past that, we would never be able to do our job.
Yeah, yeah. So you are responsible for one of my most favorite scenes in any movie ever. And I'm not just saying this because we're speaking. When they win right after they win, when Kurt Russell looks at the Russian coach and kind of does this,
Yep,
and then has this stare, like this big scene with this, like it's the whole scene from start to finish with Mark Isham's score in the background,
yep,
and then walks down that tunnel and
yep,
then has his hands over, and then eventually breaks down.
yeah.
I could barely get this out now.
Uh-huh.
This is one of the most emotional scenes I have ever seen. Like you finally see a moment where Herb Brooks is happy, and he's like his fruition came true. His belief, his dedication, and the way you capture it, the way it's captured. Oh, like it's just so
Well, yeah,
beautiful.
Kurt Russell, man. Kurt
No,
Russell, Kurt was amazing. Kurt was incredible. I mean, Kurt created that moment. I would love to take credit for it, but that's all Kurt, man. I just, we just whoops, sorry. We just set up the shots,
yeah,
and Kurt made you feel that way. That was, Kurt and Patty, the look, the no dialogue, the fact that his whole backstory, that he never made it on the team. He was the last man cut in 1960, and it's just it all just comes out of him at that moment.
if I watch that now, I mean, it has not lost its effect. It's just that good.
Mhm.
I don't know. I had Patty on the show. He's such a good guy. Just a good as a Rusione does a wonderful job portraying him.
Oh,
Um,
that's great. He
yeah,
was on the show. Great guy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I wanted to ask you, is there anything like a sports movie? I mean, because these guys were actually out there. They're actual hockey players. There's puking. There's everything that goes along with it. When you start seeing all this, have you ever seen anything like it in your experience up to this point?
No, that was all real too. I mean, that was, like you said, that was those guys were a team. I mean, they were cast from across the country. They were put together. They were at that age, you know, early 20s, where you're bonding. The bonding was incredible. All of us, really. We spent a lot of time together, not just in front of the camera, but we spent a lot of all of our off time hanging out. And yeah, so that was real, and there was nothing scripted about puking.
Yeah.
It was not planned. Gavin pushed them so hard uh, that it happened. I mean, you know, Gavin is an athlete, and he had come from a background of playing sports. So I think he kind of knew what he was doing that way. But the guys were so committed that they went all out until they're puking. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why the movie comes across as so real. Is there a shot that you remember from this? I'm sure you remember all of them, but is there a shot that you're particularly fond of in this movie?
In Miracle,
Yeah.
gosh, there's so many. There's a great shot where Johnson shoots up between the goalie's legs, and the lens comes right. The puck comes right to the lens. It's just a great shot. And then we didn't have any special effects. That was executed. I loved that shot. The other shot that I really loved is when they're in Norway. The shot's on a crane and it comes down. They're skating. They're getting their asses kicked. The guys are looking at girls and making comments. The camera comes around, and one long take lands on Kurt, and he's disgusted. And that's sort of the beginning. In fact, that's what leads to the puking, is that moment and that shot. But that was all played out in one. And you know, you see only a glimpse of the players, but you know what's going on. You know that they're not invested. And the whole story of that is told with the shot and with Kurt's close up at the end.
Yeah, and I think that's why the movie works, like, because they're real hockey players. It's everybody working. You could tell, and there's people that make sports movies that it just doesn't have that authenticity that Miracle has. Like, if I can watch Miracle now and it's held up like I just saw it yesterday, like that's a true test of time, isn't it?
I think so.
You
Yeah,
know,
I think so. Yeah, the one thing that we really wanted to avoid, and we looked at all the hockey movies that had been made, and I'm not going to name them, but there's always like a close up of the hockey player's face, and then cut to his feet skating, and then cut to a slap shot. That's three different guys.
yeah.
We tried to connect everything to everything. So the most important thing was showing that those skates belong to that face, belong to those hands, shooting that puck into the goal. And so it was really painful to shoot because we were so specific that everyone on the ice had to be 110%. If one guy in the background was lagging on take 7 or 8 or 9, we had to go again. And so it was painful. There were days that we got 90 seconds of filmed footage at the end of the day,
Wow.
because it was so specific.
How long was the shoot? The entire shoot, if you remember.
It was, let me see, the better part of, I'm going to say 4, 5, 6 months.
Wow.
Somewhere in there.
And those are long days in between. Those aren't like, hey, 7 to 3, I'm good. We're like, those are long days.
Yeah, this was a hard one. This was a hard show. And then we were on the ice for over 40 days, just doing hockey, and that's brutal. You feel the cold come up through your feet, up into your whole body, and it just stays there for 14-hour days. We did 14-hour days. Yeah.
Jeez, and what an eclectic body of work. We talked about some of the other stuff you've done. I mean, I got to believe one experience feeds into the next, right? Because I mean, there's nothing that could prepare you for shooting this movie. Like, there's nothing you could have done. I mean, I get the setting up, the shots, the commercials, your experience, but like the challenges you faced here are so unique. It's like, I mean, you're always learning as you go, right, Dan?
Yeah, but that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed, Eric, since the very beginning of when I started doing this, and that's why I like television, because I get immersed into these different worlds, and it's one different world after another. It's the variety of it and the rediscovery of it. And no two are the same, no two shows are the same. And if they are, then I'm not going to take them. I'm not going to do another legal drama, in offices like Suits. I feel like, okay, that was great. I did that. I'm really good at working with reflections now and glass. And that was one of the things that I took with me from that.
Yeah.
All the shots, that was crazy. But yes, I learned something every step, and everything that I learn, I reuse down the line.
And does it ever? This is gonna sound like a duh question, but do you ever feel like so? Herb obviously has family, he has kids, and so forth. Do you feel like as you're filming this, like because looking in the rearview mirror, this movie is beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful legacy to Herb. Like it's like he would have been so proud had he seen it. Do
Yeah,
you ever feel like
yeah,
like
I saved an email that Patty had written to Gavin that he forwarded to me that was just exactly what you're saying, how it was like it was like Herb was still alive on the screen, that we brought him back to life for her, for that 2 hours, and that she'd be so grateful for that for the rest of her life. Um, he passed away sadly August before the film came out in February, I want to say. So he never got to see it. He never got to see a cut of it even. Although
yeah,
he was present the whole time, not present physically, but if we had a question, ring him up, call him up, and he was same with all the players. In fact, O'Callahan, Ruzioni, these guys were on speed dial, and were so invested in the project that they would basically drop whatever they were doing and answer whatever questions we had.
wow, and that's just great because I mean, like the movie says at the end, he didn't get a chance to see it, but he lived it, and
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
important thing. Dan, two more questions. Thank you for all this time. You're such a great guy. Thank you for
no
this.
problem. My pleasure.
Um, are you able to watch a movie and enjoy it? Clearly, we talked Fablemans earlier. Tell me something recently that you've seen outside of maybe the Fablemans that you've been taken back either by the movie or the cinematography or looking at one of your counterparts and like, man, that's a great movie. That's beautifully shot. Can you remember something off the top of your head?
Let me see. Let me see. I've been watching The Crown, and
Oh, so
I,
good.
I love the photography. It's so British. It's so perfect. It's so elegant, and it's a style that uh, occasionally I use that style, but I kind of try to make my stuff a little messier. But that is like the guilty pleasure of elegance for me, and I just think it's fantastic. It's wonderful. It's really, really good show. Um,
Yeah, that's a great call, by the way. Great
um,
call.
what else? Well, the peripheral I've been enjoying. I did
Mhm.
some work on it. I did some additional photography on it. Stuart Howell's work is fantastic. Roberto Schaefer, their work is really, really good. So I've been digging that. What else? Tonight I'm gonna watch Maverick. So I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, you'll love it. You'll absolutely love it. Peripheral is a great show. It's another great show.
It
Yeah,
is. It is. It's wonderful.
yeah. So what's around the corner for you? I mean, you're always busy. You're always working on some great project. We talked about your filmography earlier. What's around the corner? Anything you wanted to throw out there now?
Well, yeah, yeah, I don't know if I can really talk about it. It's a second season of a show. It's called The Old Man. Um,
Oh, great first
with,
season.
with Jeff.
Jeff Bridges. Yeah,
Yeah, and he's always been a hero of mine. Lebowski's one of my all-time favorite movies. Another Deakins movie. And I'm a little nervous to meet him. I'm gonna be so starstruck because he's amazing. So yeah, I'm gonna jump on that for a few months, starting in March. And yeah, and that's I did, like I said, I did some of the peripheral. Like got finished with that shortly before it started airing.
yeah.
We did a whole bunch of reshoots and additional scenes for that.
Dan, have you ever gotten lost in a performance? Like, so I'm picturing Jeff Bridges and shooting Jeff Bridges, or like you've had some like really high end projects, and you're clearly a movie fan because you have to be. Like, are you ever lost? I mean, I'm not talking like unprofessional or being a fanboy. I'm not saying that, but like when you're filming, are you ever like, Jesus, that was amazing? I mean, I'm
Oh,
sure you say it a lot.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I finished with Steve Carell every day. I felt that way. I mean,
Yeah, he's great.
every single day, and Tonal Gleason, unbelievable. Those guys, fantastic. You mentioned earlier Anthony Starr. There were moments in his performance that I didn't want to breathe because I didn't want to change any molecules in the atmosphere because everything was so perfect. Yeah, that's why we do it. Those moments where you get lost in that and you see a performer become something, create something that moves you. That I think is the greatest art of the 21st century.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so great to see a person who loves movies and so good at his craft kind of be the same person. Because I always feel like sometimes they get a vibe from guests where they're great at what they do, but they're lukewarm on movies and shows. You're clearly all in on this as a career and a pastime too.
Oh, big time. I mean, I'll finish a 15-hour day, go home and watch an episode or two before I go to sleep. Yeah, of something. I need to feed the beast. I need more.
Yes, yeah, Dan. It was so great to meet you, and I hope you come back on down the road.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Derek Thomas and Monday Morning Critic Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also connect with Monday Morning Critic on Instagram and Facebook, MDM Critic on Twitter, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are found. All episodes available, www.mmcpodcast.com.